Is there anything left on your bucket list, anything you'd like to do?
Well, that's an interesting question. I am so old and weak compared to what I was when I was 96 that I no longer want to catch a 200-pound tuna. It's just too goddamn much work. To get it in, it takes too much physical strength. So I don't know why I would have paid any amount to catch a 200-pound tuna when I was younger and never caught one. And I didn't plan it. It just happened. And when it happened, I welcomed it.
So that man was Charlie Munger, and he just passed away at the age of 99. He was not a social media influencer, and most of YouTube probably doesn't know who he is, but one of the most famous quotes you might have heard from him goes like this: "The first 100,000 is a bitch, but you gotta do it. I don't care what you have to do if it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon. Find a way to get your hands on $100,000. After that, you can ease off the gas a little bit." Now that quote is one of the things that inspired me to save my first $100,000 in my 20s. Now you could probably dedicate an entire YouTube series about all of his life's accomplishments, his quotes, his best advice, and I'm sure you'll see those videos. But instead, I want to share with you his biggest failures. More specifically, he called them human misjudgments. Now the most interesting part about these misjudgments is that they're not just his, but it's mistakes he says we all make as human beings all the time. And he dedicated a big part of his life to thinking about them so that he didn't make them as much as other people did. And it's these mistakes that we all make all the time that he says is the biggest reason for why he made as much money as he did throughout his life. Now in 1995, he gave this speech of these 25 principles in front of Harvard, and it's over an hour long. I'll leave a link down below where you can watch it, but this is my condensed version of these 25 principles I try to live by that really helped me save and make my first $100,000. Number 1, reward and punishment super response tendency. Charlie says that human beings respond really strongly to incentives. So if your job is gonna pay you more for doing better, you'll do better. That makes sense, but where he says the mistake will happen is when something happens that's called incentive-caused bias. And Wells Fargo is a really good example. Remember when employees were told to open more and more accounts to meet their quotas? And so eventually they created a bunch of fake accounts just to please their management so they could keep their jobs. So bad incentives are the ones where the short-term gain makes more sense than the long-term gain. And he says the solution is to be skeptical of these incentive systems and question everything. Number 2, liking/loving tendency. Charlie says that when we like someone, we tend to overlook their faults. So if you've ever been on a date with someone that maybe you're attracted to, you've probably overlooked the red flags because you were only looking at the positives. In the investment world, that means if you really like a stock, you'll probably ignore the bad news that should make you really skeptical. Number 3, disliking or hating tendency. In the investment world, sometimes people don't like Tesla stock because they don't like Elon Musk, or they don't like Bitcoin because they think of scams and frauds and failed exchanges. But if you think like that, you could miss out on a lot of big opportunities just because you're biased against it. So once again, the solution is to look within yourself and try to be objective. Number 4, doubt avoidance tendency. This is a fault we share thanks to evolution, because as mammals that were chased by predators, we developed a brain that needed to remove doubt and come to a solution really, really fast so we didn't get eaten. But that's a really bad outcome for investing, especially during a market crash, because if you come to a quick decision to remove your doubt because you feel uncomfortable, you'll probably end up making a mistake. Number 5, inconsistency avoidance tendency. This is a way of saying that we like to be consistent even when it hurts us because we don't like to feel inconsistent. And the best example I can give you is, have you ever met someone who consistently likes to give advice to people all the time about everything? Relationships and business, even though they have no business of their own? It's not because of a fear of failure that they don't try. It's because if they fail, it would be inconsistent with the kind of person that everyone perceives them to be, so they never end up trying. The solution, Charlie says, is to never form your own beliefs and habits and opinions too quickly, and to counter-argue with yourself about your own beliefs and habits. Number 6, curiosity tendency. Charlie says that curiosity is good because it can get rid of bad psychological tendencies. And I agree, it's good, but it can also lead to bad. For example, as a guy who makes finance and macroeconomics videos on YouTube, Sometimes I'm curious to experiment what topics will perform well outside the norm, so I start to experiment with things like NFTs. The short-term benefit is that it can get a lot of views when it's popular. The long-term downside is that I can become an easy target in the future if those things fail. The solution to me is to be transparent about the difference between how I actually invest and what I do to satisfy a YouTube algorithm, or maybe just not make the video at all. I don't know. Number 7, Kantian fairness tendency. This rule says to treat others the way you want to be treated. If everyone followed this golden rule, we'd have a better society. And in business, it means if companies pay people more, even when they could get away with paying less, those are the better companies in the long term. And if someone doesn't want to be fair to you, then don't waste your time with them. Number 8, envy/jealousy tendency. Throughout evolution, food was pretty hard to come by, so whenever we saw it, we wanted to have it. But if we saw someone else get to it first, we'd become jealous. Nowadays, food isn't really hard to come by, but other resources might be, like money. So if we see someone have money that we don't, that can lead to hatred or resentment. That it's not greed that drives the world, but envy. The solution is to try to be more grateful and appreciative for what you do have. Number 9, reciprocation tendency. Charlie says that humans tend to be the pleasers more than we like to be the pleased. We like to return good favors more than we like to return harm. And he says that's good for when we build a society, but it can also be weaponized against us. And we can see examples of it in business, negotiation, and marketing. If you ever agreed to doing something you didn't want to do, it's probably because you felt guilty. That's how it was presented. You felt guilty, so you agreed to do it. Now the solution, he says, is to take the time before you speak, think about it first, and learn how to say no. Number 10, influence from mere association tendency. Before someone asks you to donate money, they might call you generous, and you might give them more money because you've been influenced by your association with the word generous. This works with pricing too. If you see a higher price, you probably think to yourself it's probably better quality. That's why there's a saying of, you get what you pay for. But sometimes you're just paying extra for the logo and you're not getting anything more out of that. It also works with gambling. Sometimes people place a bet and then they win, and then they keep making the same bet over and over again thinking that they'll win again instead of realizing what it actually was, dumb luck. Even the success of my YouTube channel was partially down to luck, and that doesn't make me a genius stock-picking financial analyst. I'm aware of that, and I try to remind people of that every time they watch my videos. Success on YouTube doesn't translate to success elsewhere. Number 11, simple pain-avoiding psychological denial. This is the saying, truth hurts. We like to avoid the truth when it really hurts us. So in the stock market, someone who's afraid of investing their money might say, it's all rigged. That's the reality they've created that eventually ends up hurting them. But on the opposite end, someone who's losing $1 million on a stock position might create a reality where it makes sense to keep on going. And we do this because we like to avoid the pain of facing the truth by denying that it was ever there. Number 12, excessive self-regard tendency. We overestimate what is ours, whether that's our ideas, our kids, our houses, and we over-appraise their objective value just because they're ours. In the stock market, that's why some people try to become day traders or stock pickers or try to time the market even when the data says we shouldn't. Number 13, over-optimism tendency. We're overly optimistic about our chances of success. Charlie says that's why happy people like to gamble their money into slot machines or into crypto or buy lottery tickets. Instead, he says that we should use this simple math created by Fermat and Pascal to calculate the probably very low probability of us actually winning instead of leading by blind optimism. Number 14, deprival superreaction tendency. Charlie says that winning $10 feels less good than the pain of losing $10. And he says that when we're really close to winning, but we don't and we miss it by just a hair, it makes us feel as though we've won, but then we've just been robbed. It's why slot machines are so effective because they'll make you feel like you almost won. And when you lose, your super reaction tendency is to keep on going because you're so close to breaking even. Charlie says we all have this tendency and we should be mindful of it, especially when it comes to investing. Number 15, social proof tendency. You ever see those experiments where people just randomly fall in line behind someone else? Or have you ever noticed that if you look up, other people will start to randomly look up with you? Or if you're driving in traffic and you're stuck, you'll notice there's an entire lane that's completely empty that no one else is using. This happens because human beings like to follow others. We feel comfortable doing what we see other people do. That's why it's so hard to be a contrarian investor, because we'd rather be wrong together than be wrong by ourselves. But if you can notice this flaw in human logic, you'll be able to cut some lines and maybe make some money. Number 16, contrast misreaction tendency. This is one of the most powerful tactics used against us in negotiation. If you go to negotiate what you want to be paid and your expectations here, but their offer is way lower than what you expected, meeting in the middle might feel like a big win to us, even though it might still be not fair. A real estate agent might show you 3 horribly bad, insanely overpriced houses, and then they'll show you a 4th that's also bad, but kind of moderately, somewhat overpriced. And that's how they can make the sale. Beware of these contrast misreaction tendencies. Number 17, stress influence tendency. We tend to do better in life when we feel a little stressed. But if there's too much stress, then it becomes a bad thing. So the point is not to make decisions quickly if you realize you're stressed. Number 18, availability misweighing tendency. After the 2008 housing crisis, a lot of investors swore they'd never invest in a house again, just because it was recent. It was a reminder to them of their failure and the risk they took. Unfortunately, a lot of those investors missed out on owning one of the best performing assets in the world. Charlie says that we have a tendency to overemphasize the importance of recent events, and we don't give enough credibility to what happened in the past. So he says the solution is to flip this formula. What happened recently, we shouldn't give as much value to, and we should give a little more value to what happened in the past so we can make them a little more even. Number 19, use it or lose it tendency. If we're not consistent and we don't practice the skills that we've learned in the past, eventually we lose them. Number 20, drug misinfluence tendency. Any kind of chemical dependency usually leads to addiction and bad results, so stay away from it. Number 21, senescence misinfluence tendency. As we age, Charlie says it's harder to learn new skills, so instead we should practice what we've learned in the past so we don't lose them. Number 22, authority misinfluence tendency. This is a tendency of human beings to put too much faith into our leaders. Sometimes throughout history that's been a good thing, sometimes it's been a really bad thing, but the point is we put a lot of faith into human beings rather than their ideas because it's a lot more complicated to think about ideas sometimes. Now the solution, Charlie says, is to be very careful because if there's a dominant authority figure, they become really hard to remove from power. Number 23, twaddle tendency. This is just another word for BS. In fact, there's even a legal word for it, and it's called puffery. In real estate, you're allowed some puffery. Like you could list a house for sale and you could say, this house is located in the fastest growing, best community in the USA. But what does that mean? That's probably all BS. Charlie says to pay attention to this puffery or this twaddle so you can separate the difference between fact and marketing. Number 24, reason-respecting tendency. This is one of the most interesting ones. This says that human beings are far more likely to go along with something as long as they get a reason. So remember back in school, your best teachers were probably the ones that gave you a reason for why it was important to learn what they were about to teach. But Charlie also says it can be used against us. And the example he gives was of a long line at the office where everyone is waiting to copy over some papers. And then someone cuts to the front of the line and they just say, I really need to copy some papers. And the odds of that person being allowed to cut to the front was drastically increased just because they gave a reason, even though that reason was the same as everybody else's. And number 25, Lollapalooza tendency. When there's a mix of more than one of these psychological tendencies, it can lead to extreme outcomes. And this is just as true with investing as it is in life. I really hope you check out the link down below to the original video where Charlie shares incredible stories and specific examples of all of these, but I want to take this time to thank Charlie Munger for all the things he's done in life and all the people he's inspired along the way. Thank you, Charlie. May he rest in peace. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Those of you who are about to enter business school or who are there, I recommend you learn to do it our way, but at least until you're out of school, you have to pretend to do it their way.
People don't seem to get that point. You have any idea why, Charlie?
Warren, if people weren't so often wrong, we wouldn't be so rich. Yeah, I think you would understand any presentation using the word EBITDA if every time you saw that word, you just substituted the phrase bullshit earnings. So, no, I'm optimistic about life. If I can be optimistic when I'm nearly dead, surely the rest of you can handle a little inflation. And of course, that's the other advice. The best way to get what you want in life is to deserve what you want. How could it be otherwise? It's not crazy enough so that the world is looking for a lot of undeserving people to reward. Everybody wants fiscal virtue, but not quite yet. They're like that guy who felt that way about sex. He was willing to give it up, but not quite yet. Well, you don't want to be like the motion picture executive in California, and they said the funeral was so large because everybody wanted to make sure he was dead. It was investment banker aided fraud. Now, not exactly novel.
That does not mean we approve of every buyback at all, though. I mean, we've seen...
No. I think some people just buy it to keep the stock up, and that, of course, is insane and immoral. But apart from that, it's fine.
I've listened to so many nonsensical cost of capital discussions that...
I've never heard an intelligent one.
Yeah. Charlie's big on lowering expectations.
Absolutely. That's the way I got married. My wife lowered her expectations. Sure, there are a lot of things in life way more important than wealth. All that said, some people do get confused. I play golf with a man, he says, what good is health? You can't buy money with it. Well, there are a whole lot of things I don't think about. And one of them is companies that are losing $2 or $3 billion a year and going public. The general system for money management requires people to pretend that they can do something that they can't do, and to pretend to like it when they really don't. I think that's a terrible way to spend your life, but it's very well paid. Well, I can't give you a formulaic approach because I don't use one. If you want a formula, you should go back to graduate school. They'll give you lots of formulas that won't work. As Samuel Johnson said famously, I can give you an argument, but I can't give you an understanding.
It's extraordinary how resistant some people are to learning anything.
And yet it's perfectly obvious, at least to me, that to say that derivative accounting in America is a sewer is an insult to sewage. It's not that great a business as a business, casualty insurance. It's a tough game. There are temptations to be stupid in it. It's like banking. But competency is a relative concept. And what a lot of us need, including the one speaking, what I needed to get ahead was to compete against idiots. And luckily there's a large supply. And I don't like multitasking. I see these people doing three things at once and I think, God, what a terrible way that is to think. I like cryptocurrencies a lot less than you do. And I think the people who are professional traders that go into trading cryptocurrencies, it's just disgusting. It's like somebody else is trading turds and you decide I can't be left out. One reminds me, once I asked a man who just left a large investment bank, and I said, how does your firm make its money? He said, off the top, off the bottom, off both sides, and in the middle. Well, I would rather throw a viper down my shirt front than hire a compensation consultant. I think I've offended enough people.
Right. There's 2 or 3 in the balcony.